Welcome back to Do It All. I'm Gabriel, and I'm here to help you unlock your potential and be everything your heart desires. Are you ready to empower those around you today? You're going to learn about ethical influence and persuasion from our esteemed guest and leader in the field. You'll leave with actionable knowledge to motivate others, whether in your career, relationship, or personal life. Together, we'll explore how small, consistent actions can create trust and unlock lasting influence. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Christopher Phelps, CEO of the Cialdini Institute. He's been personally trained by none other than New York Times bestselling author Robert Cialdini. Dr. Phelps champions the principles of influence, the psychology of persuasion, a timeless work with over 4 million copies sold, which continues to guide leaders and anyone looking to inspire trust and action. Before we jump in, be sure to like, subscribe, and join the Do It All newsletter. For more tools on influence and persuasion, visit Cialdini.com, spelled Cialdini.com. Also, just a quick note, today's interview is not sponsored. I reached out personally out of my deep respect and interest to help all of you become your very best. Dr. Phelps, your career has been fascinating. Could you share your journey, how your passion for influence began, the work you do now, and its broader impact?
Yeah, definitely, Gabriel, and I appreciate you having me on today to tell that story. It was interesting as an entrepreneur. I started my first business and by joining a business and partnering up with someone who had an established business in place here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I did that back in 2003. And my partner at the time was very good about letting me spend in the first couple of months his money on my marketing ideas to get our business successful. And the end result was that we kind of doubled the business that year. So we had a phenomenal year of growth and then grew from one location to 7 locations. One location to 4 locations. Okay, definitely could not have handled 7. But going from 1 to 4, and in essence, we had 10 times the revenue of the business. We did that over a 7-year period. So what was interesting was I didn't know influence and persuasion for any of that. That was just a plan I had and a mindset. And it was just, I was dead set on this mindset of growing for growth's sake. Right.
Right.
And by all accounts, most people would say that I was successful. Started making plenty of money and life was good. The challenge was that I was doing all the operations decisions for those 4 businesses. At the same time, I was working in those businesses, and I had realized almost too late that growth for growth's sake, what that got me was I had, in essence, trapped myself in my own business. And if anybody has ever felt that, you know exactly what I'm talking about there. And it's not a good feeling or realization to come to. And so I realized that because we had taken on other partners along the way, that their goal was ultimately to keep me doing all the work. And then they were going to feel free to keep showing up and going home without doing all that work, right? Enjoying the benefits, if you will. So I realized that I needed to make some bold moves and I needed to get back freedom of time and other aspects. So I did something crazy. I made my partners an offer they couldn't refuse. I offered them the 2 best offices that we had, businesses, if you will, the ones making the most profit, least amount of debt. And I offered to take over the 2 worst ones. Okay, so the highest debt, least producing ones.
Sounds like a challenge.
Right.
A good one.
Safe for them, not so safe for me, right? And one of those offices, in fact, was costing me $70,000 a month in expense, but only bringing in $35,000 a month in revenue. Well, again, you don't have to be a business major to realize that's not a good check to write every month, but I knew I had to make it safe to free those guys up to be happier elsewhere. But taking over your 2 worst practices, it was a very sobering experience. To me, it was a calculated risk, but after going through that, I had all these fires that were going on at the two business locations, and I couldn't put my finger on the root cause of the problem. And so your brain does something helpful, quote unquote, to protect you when it doesn't understand the root cause of the problem or it doesn't think you have the capabilities to solve the problem at hand. And the two things it does to protect you is it ignores the problem, number one, right? There's no problem. I'm good. I'm
Right.
fine. Or it procrastinates on the problem. Okay, yeah, I see it. I know I got to get to it, but it's not like a raging fire. I don't have to get to it now. I'll
It'll
get to it
go
at some
away. Yeah.
point. It'll go. It'll be fine. Or we'll get to it at some point. So we can procrastinate on them. And I didn't realize that, but that's what I was doing when I had the four locations, right? Letting these small fires just go at bay. Well, when you're down to two locations and one of those is costing you a significant amount of money every month, suddenly it was a problem I couldn't ignore anymore. My challenge was I just couldn't get to the root cause of what was behind the problem. Okay. It wasn't that I didn't have the capability. I just didn't know what am I going to work on? Where do I turn my focus? Right. Because I saw issues with my customers, right? Why they weren't saying yes to what we were presenting to them, to my team members, if you will. Like, why do I have to keep micromanaging them? Why do I have to
Hmm.
tell them to do stuff? Why don't they just do stuff? Why is it that when the cat's away, the mice will play, so to speak? And some of my employees that worked for me, again, I would invest in them in their education, but they wouldn't come back and use the education that I had invested in to add more services and things to our clientele. So all of these little pain points going on, and I couldn't figure out the root cause why. And then I was very fortunate that someone invited me to come to a business seminar. And lo and behold, who was speaking at that seminar but Dr. Robert Cialdini was the keynote speaker. And at that event, because I'd never heard of Dr. Cialdini prior to this, he talked about the six principles of persuasion that were available at the time. Right now we have seven, but back then there were only six principles. And one of them in particular was kind of my aha moment, and I was like, yeah, that guy right there, man. If I can get to that, the root cause of my issues, okay, I think I can make some things happen here. And so I went to Dr. Cialdini. I sought him out. I bought his book, Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, digested it over a weekend, and then went to a training course they offered out in Phoenix, Arizona, and left with like 1,000 ideas on what I could do with my struggling businesses. And so I found out at that meeting that they happen to have a certification program and a training program. And so I was lucky enough that when I applied, they accepted me into the family, so to speak. So I got to go deeper in my knowledge and training in these things, and then got to go back and use my two struggling businesses as my laboratory to experiment. Right. And so I would
Yeah.
take this kind of behavioral science research that I had just learned from him and go back and experiment and say, well, I see how they did this in this experiment. I think it might apply to what I'm going on in this pain point here in my business. Okay, let me try that out. Okay. And so I did. Okay. Well, and over the next 3 years, my business, those two struggling ones, had phenomenal amounts of growth. Okay. To the tune where at the end of that 3 year period, my two businesses were doing more in revenue and profitability and allowed more of my free time than when I had four locations
Amazing.
as well. So realizing that changing my mindset from growing for growth's sake to maximizing the capacity of what I had, using these influence principles as the foundation to do that was absolutely game changing for me in my life and my career.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. So, your role as the CEO of the Cialdini Institute involves balancing leadership and ethical influence. How do you start your day with purpose and intention?
Yeah, well, I think first off, it comes from being grateful, right? So I've
I love
built
that.
mul- I've built multiple businesses, startups, turned multiple businesses around, and so because of that history, when Dr. Cialdini asked me to head up the U.S. Division of the institute, it's kind of like when the master asks, you can't say no, right?
Yeah.
So being honored and grateful that he even asked me to do this is part where it starts, right? Because truly, I still feel like I owe him, right? One of our principles is reciprocity, and it
Uh-huh.
basically states that if someone gives you something of significance and of value, this obligation is created inside of us that we feel the need to give back,
That's right.
right? And give back in kind. Well, that was such a powerful gift he gave me, and the meaning that training, this education and the principles, and what it did for my businesses changed my life to where to this day I still feel like I owe him. I haven't given back enough, so to speak. So being grateful and understanding that I'm still the one that needs to reciprocate is a big part of it. The next thing I think is making sure that I get myself in the right mindset at the start of every day. Okay. Because mindset is huge. Your mindset is who you are in the moment you're about to make a decision. But who you are in that moment, and thus the decision you're going to make, is deeply affected by where you are in that moment.
Hmm.
Where are you at mentally? Like, what are your thoughts? Okay. If they're always negative, 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 well, do you see how that might affect your mindset and thus your actions and decisions you make that day? Okay.
Even unintentionally, you might reflect that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So where are your thoughts at mentally? Where are you at emotionally in that moment? Right? Are you coming into the situation calm, or are you coming into the situation after having a knockdown, drag out fight with your significant other? Right? So where you are emotionally in that moment. And believe it or not, the environment, the sights, the sounds, the smells of the things around you can affect your mindset. So making sure that I purposely get myself in the right mindset. And I do that by starting the day by listening to Dr. Cialdini himself, listening to little sound bites and snippets of him and pieces of advice I've seen him give to people on podcasts and other things recorded throughout the day is a great way to start the day. Listening and hearing it from the man himself to remind me, yes, these are the things that we're building our business around and how we're helping others. So let's focus on these today. And then focusing on turning my attention to our goals, right? So we set goals for the year, for the quarter, each month. Well, making sure I keep that top of mind. So looking at a reminder that literally everywhere when I sit every day, I see it before I get to do anything. To bring it top of mind and remind me that this is where my focus needs to be today. And I want to make progress in these areas today. And a couple things are going to happen. I'm going to look at that and go and think about the day before and go, wow, did I make any progress on these yesterday? Okay. If I did, fantastic. Let's celebrate that win. If I didn't, oh crap, I better get something done today. So, right, bringing it more top of mind and seeing where I am in that process of progress or not helps me get more motivated, right, to do more that day, especially every day previously that went by that I didn't make any progress for one reason or another. So being grateful and then keeping myself in the right mindset are key.
Yeah, these are great mindfulness tips. I love it. So, can I ask you, what's one thing that people are often surprised to learn about you? That's
Yeah,
something they might not know, but just are completely surprised by.
yeah. Well, definitely in the influence and persuasion space, which can be the education space, the world of psychology, right? People see the doctor title in front of my name, Dr. Chris Phelps, and they assume I'm in education, like I have a doctorate or that I have a psychology degree, right?
Yeah,
Well, actually, what surprises them is that I'm a dentist. That's my doctorate, right? And so that kind of surprises people. And so those businesses I mentioned earlier were dental practices,
hmm,
right? And dental businesses and dental support services that I built in the dental industry. So, as I often joke to people, that at my core, what I realize about myself is that truly I'm an entrepreneur, but I'm an entrepreneur that happens to be a pretty good dentist. So, having found my way from the dental chair to now running the US version of the Institute has been an amazing journey.
I'm sure. I, I'll admit, I was surprised by that as well. But things like this often turn out serendipitously and have an amazing effect, don't they? Can you tell us about another eye-opening aha moment you've had in this field?
Yeah. Well, part of this was a couple aha moments. Number one was when I sold those two best offices and took over my two worst offices. The realization I had was this conflict within me because I thought my passion and my motivation at its core was to be a dentist, right? So I made the decision to be a dentist when I was in the seventh grade. And so that was my commitment, right? And I was trying to be consistent in that commitment. So I thought treating my patients was what my destiny was going to be. But my actions, building these other offices and then building these other companies outside of the offices, showed me all those actions kept pulling me further and further away from the chair. So this conflict within, are you a
Mm,
dentist? Or are you an entrepreneur? What is it? This pull. And so I realized, like I said, that I'm an entrepreneur who happens to be a good dentist, right? That, my destiny was not to be at the chair full time with my patients. As much as I enjoyed that, as much as I love talking to them and building those businesses, that I was built to do something else. So that was a big aha moment. And being able to give myself permission to let that go, that chairside interaction with the patients and the day to day activities, to focus on the bigger picture things, was a big aha moment and turning point in my life. The second one, I think, comes back to that time when I heard Dr. Cialdini speak, and I couldn't put my finger on the root cause of my problems. And I realized that of all six principles he talked about, there was one principle in particular. That was the aha moment. That sucker was the root cause of all of my problems. Why weren't my patients returning for treatment that we presented? Why did I have to keep telling my team to do stuff? Why didn't they just do it? Right? Why do I have to keep micromanaging them? Why did my associate doctors that work for me, why would they get education and not bring that education back to serve our patients? Add new procedures and stuff and services for the practice, right? To benefit. Well, ultimately, I realized the consistency principle was at its core. And that principle, to say it simply, is when people make a commitment, they tend to do. Okay? And they follow through with their commitments. So why wasn't I seeing the behavior? Because what was I missing? I wasn't getting a commitment out of them to do anything. Not really. And if you don't get people to commit, it's hard to stay consistent and watch them follow through as a result. So my thought was, and my theory was, well, if I can get better commitments out of people, then I should see a change in that behavior. And boy, did I. Right. So that was the real fundamental growth behind those offices, where each of those two dental practices grew by $1 million in revenue per practice 3 years in a row. Okay.
wow. Yeah.
Which in my industry is I won't say I'm a unicorn, but it's not easy to do. Let's put it that way. Okay. What's even crazier about that story is that the years of that phenomenal growth was 2008, 2009, and 2010. Okay. So during the housing
Hmm.
crisis in the US, right, which kind of reminds me a lot of this inflation stuff we've been going through lately, but in a time of economic uncertainty, when more dental practices went bankrupt in that 3 year period than in the history of dentistry, my colleagues are struggling nationwide, across the world even, and we're growing by leaps and bounds. Okay. Why? Because my aha moment there was I realized not only was that principle at the root cause of the problem, but my strategy prior to this was making strategies around the excuses people were giving us after we heard no. For instance, they said we were too expensive. So what was our strategy to solve that? Let's discount it, right? That's your solution, right? You're hearing no, you think it's because it's so expensive. Well, this is what you're going to do. Well, I realized that wasn't the real reason that they used to make the decision. Anyone will rationalize it after the fact. Doesn't mean that's the real root cause of the decision behind it. So I realized these principles at their core were what people fundamentally were using to make the majority of their decisions. So when I stopped making my strategies around the excuses people gave me after no and started building them around these principles, suddenly we started seeing more yeses, even in a time of economic turmoil.
I'm sure that principle not only helped with your leadership, but how about the way you felt personally? Were you making more commitments to yourself?
Definitely. As one of my mentors says, more people would do more things in their business and their life if they had confidence,
Hmm,
right? So everybody's
I
just
like
waiting to
that.
get confidence and then they'll do something. Well, confidence is a byproduct of the formula and not the starting point, right? First, you have to make the commitment that you're going to do it, whatever that thing is. Okay. Dan Sullivan is the master of this and he calls this the 4 C's. You have to make the commitment, number one. Well, then that's going to create a courage phase because you're not going to have the capabilities necessarily, right? So you're going to need the courage, right, to move forward. And with courage is fear. I mean, you can't siphon
Hmm.
fear out of courage. But as Dan says, Fear is the result of wetting your pants. Courage is what you do while you're wearing wet pants, right?
I love it.
So using it as the energy that it is, not in a negative way, but in a positive way to fuel you to keep pushing forward.
Right.
Well, from courage, then you find the capabilities. Either you get the education, you learn how to do it, you hire somebody with these capabilities to bring them on board, or you outsource it to somebody who has the capabilities. But in essence, you find the capabilities and you figure out a way to get it done. Last comes confidence at the result of doing all this. And that confidence is what feeds you to make the next commitment. And around the circle you go again to make the next commitment. And that's kind of the cycle of growth. Okay. So commitment is key, as you said. That's where it all starts.
This is very enlightening. I love it. Okay, here's something different. How do you hope the world looks in 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Truthfully, I would hope that the world 10 years from now is more collaborative versus competitive. Okay.
Same.
And here's, the blessing and the curse of consistency and commitments. Sometimes you can get so committed to an idea, a cause, that you can't see anything past that, right or wrong. Okay. And, an example I like to give is you look at the state of our political environment right now between Republicans and Democrats. Most of them are so committed to this ideal behind what that means to them to be a Republican or a Democrat that they can't see the other side's perspective, okay, at all.
Mm-hmm.
They've drawn a line in the sand and that's it. It's one side or the other. We're right, you're wrong. There's no in between. Well, like most things, there's a spectrum to it, right?
Right.
Not everything is crystal clear, right? So when people get so committed down a path that they can't move, well, then they can't adapt, right? And they can't function together and bad things happen. They get more competitive when we all should be more collaborative, understanding of the other side, being open, not to everything they have to say, but some of the things they have to say may have some value, right? And take other people's perspectives. And what comes out of that when we're collaborative is always going to be a better product than if we're trying to compete.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I like that perspective. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to talk about is how this all ties in. In my episode, Building Inner Confidence, Unlock the Secrets to Trustworthiness, I explore the commitment consistency principle. This topic resonates deeply today as people seek ways to inspire trust and influence in their work and personal lives. Your experience is invaluable here. Could you share how this principle is shaping modern leadership and any broader insights you'd like to offer?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, let's start out for those that don't know the definition of the principle.
Great idea. Yeah.
What does consistency mean, right? And because the principle is consistency, even though we're talking about commitments. Consistency means this: when you make a commitment, okay, take a stand on an issue, put skin in the game, whatever that means to you. But when you make a true commitment, there's a lot of external and internal influence on you to follow through and be consistent and do what you said you were going to do. Okay. Well, we know this to be true when you think of the opposite of the word consistent. What do we call people who routinely are inconsistent in their thoughts, actions, beliefs, who don't do what they say they're going to do oftentimes? Well, there's no positive word in the English language to describe those people, right? We call them wishy-washy, flakes. We call them liars, okay? So there's a lot of external social influence on us to not be perceived in that way by others, okay? We want to be perceived as being consistent in our thoughts, actions, and beliefs. At the same time, there's this internal influence on you is that you don't want to see yourself as being inconsistent in your thoughts, actions, and beliefs. You don't want to think of yourself as a liar, right? So there's an internal source of influence on you. It's actually one of the few principles that has a dual source, outside and inside, okay? So that's why it's so powerful. If people make a commitment, they tend to do, okay? So the challenge with most businesses and leaderships, and the problem I was having was They don't understand, well, if I need a commitment, how do I get it? What kind of commitments do I need to get out of people? Well, the most powerful commitments really fall into kind of three categories. And the best business leaders and managers out there have understood this and have started tapping into their power. And the first one, of course, is public commitments, right?
Yeah.
Are powerful. The more people that know you said you were going to do something, right, the more influence there's going to be on you to do it. Okay. Because we don't want others to perceive us in those negative terms that we talked about. So getting public commitments out of people is key. Um, Voluntary commitments are important, right? And that's kind of one of the fundamental things about what separates persuasion from coercion, manipulation, intimidation, hierarchical authority, somebody in charge of you, a boss, let's say, telling you to do stuff. Okay. So all of those fall under the category of influence. All of those will influence people, just like an incentive might influence people. But when you look at persuasion, it's at the opposite end of the spectrum and totally different than coercion, intimidation, and force. Okay. Why? Because of that voluntary commitment aspect. With coercion, intimidation, when somebody forces you to do something, let's say they put a gun to your head, you don't really feel like you have a choice, right? You don't feel in control. Somebody is forcing you down this path, right? Against your will, if you will. Versus persuasion is all about giving people choices, all
Right.
about giving them a chance to voluntarily take a path, okay? And persuasion, by definition, is that you, the recipient, receive a message in some format. So you hear it, you see it, you read it, whatever, but this message gets in front of you, and something about the message changes your perspective about that thing. And because you change your perspective, you change your mindset. And because it changed your mindset, you change your thinking and thus the way you take action as a result. But the key there is nobody forced you to do that. Nobody put a gun to your head to think that way, right? You chose to do it every step of the way. So persuasion, right, is the good side of influence, I like to say, because it's all about presenting people choices. You're not forcing them down any path they don't want to go down. Versus coercion, intimidation, right, it means they are out of control, right? They don't feel like they have a choice in the matter, okay? So of getting people a voluntary commitment, doing something as simple as saying, which would you prefer? Like in the world of dentistry, you as my patient, I may say, hey, Gabriel, by the way, your tooth's busted. You need a crown. Well, in telling you that, I have now taken away your control. And many times it's almost like we call this in the psychology world, the remote control syndrome. When somebody takes away the remote control to the TV from you and you're used to holding it, what's your first instinct? You want to get it back.
Yep.
That's my remote control. Thank you very much. Right. So instantly you may be sitting there thinking in your mind, okay, hey, I'm in charge of me. I'll decide when I need this crown. Right. My tooth doesn't hurt right now. I'll figure it out. Thank you very much. So
Mhm.
in your mind, you're already telling me no, but all I see is you were nodding your head saying, sure, doc. Mm-hmm. When it comes time to go schedule, what happens? Well, let me check my schedule. Let me talk to my spouse or significant other. Let me do anything but say yes to you right now. Is the end result. Okay, so that's where we got to be careful. Versus if I just said, you know what, Gabriel, you got some options here, boss. Number one is you could do nothing, but here's what's going to happen. That infection in your tooth is going to get deeper, get to the center of the nerve of the tooth, and if we wait down the road, you're looking at a root canal build up in a crown, which you don't want. Or we could avoid all that and get to it today, and it's only a crown. Which would you prefer? Wait and pay more money, time, and effort for the root canal, or do the crown today? So
And
the
I know
better,
what you're saying is the truth, so it gives me an option.
exactly.
Yeah,
So just by presenting things as a this or that scenario, automatically you're giving people a voluntary a choice.
it's so
Okay.
simple.
So the better you get at presenting things in that format, the more acceptance you're going to have, usually to the ideal thing you want them to say yes to. So public commitments are key. Voluntary commitments are absolutely key. The last one, of course, is you need to get active commitments out of people. Active commitments. And there's kind of three categories of active commitments, each with increasing levels of influence. So the first one, of course, is a verbal commitment, right? You got to tell somebody you're going to do it. So a simple study done at a popular restaurant in Chicago where they had all the authority. They won all these awards. They had all this social proof. They pictures of famous people and crowds, uh, always having dinner at this place. But they still had a 30% no-show rate on reservations. Okay. Imagine for your business if 30% of the people that made an appointment to talk to you about potential sales didn't show, right?
Yeah.
So they ended their reservation phone calls by making a statement. Please call us if you need to change or cancel your reservation. Well, just by changing it to a commitment question and a verbal commitment question, will you please call us
Hmm.
if you need to change this? And they waited for people to say yes and make that verbal commitment. That one move dropped no-show rates from 30% to 10.
Huh.
Okay.
Can I
Simple.
jump in with something interesting?
Yeah.
When my daughter was, 2 or something, and we would tell her to go to sleep, it would be like, "Go to sleep." And maybe the chance of that was like 10%.
Yeah.
But when I changed it to, and maybe this was just because I had read the influence book at the time, or maybe I just figured it out. When I changed it to, "Are you going to sleep or will you go to sleep?" It it worked almost every time when I turned it into a question, and you reminded me of that in that moment. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, it's
yeah,
a perfect example of that because not only did she give you a verbal commitment, you in essence gave her the choice.
right, exactly. I made
You
her think
responded with
about
no.
it, and then she would go to sleep. It was amazing.
Yep. So even as an early age, especially, and this is why we don't like people telling us anything, because from kids we learn not to appreciate the fact when people try to tell us things and don't give us a choice in the matter, right? You gave her a choice and got the verbal commitment, which was key. So verbal commitments are powerful. The next level up is written commitments. We tend to live up to what we write down. So if you can get people to write their commitments down, it's powerful. So in a medical office setting, they did a study where they had patients in one group, they would fill out their next appointment card on their behalf with the next appointment day and time. And in a different group of people, similar demographics and whatnot, they had the patient fill out in their own next appointment card. So they wrote out their own time and date of this appointment. Well, just by having the patient fill out that card themselves, that led to an 18% decrease in no-shows on cancellations of those appointments. Okay. So we tend to get people to write stuff down, they tend to live up to it. Okay. So written commitments are powerful. And of
Yeah,
course, the
not
highest.
only are you committing, but you're also committing it to memory more effectively as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, it means more when you write it down. It means more to you, and it's a higher value you put on it as a result. Okay. Of course, our third type of active commitment and the most powerful is effort. Okay. Anytime you put effort into something, time, money, right? That's the skin in the game commitment, right? Effort equals skin in the game, whether that means time or money or something else to you. But for instance, if somebody prepays for to be at your appointment, well, the odds are pretty good they're going to show up for that appointment. They're not going to miss it. So, understanding those three types, those categories of commitments you need to get and how to get them are absolutely critical for your success.
absolutely. I love this. I hope everyone's taking notes. So,
Yep.
Dr. Phelps has shown us that ethical influence can transform not only how we lead, but also how we connect with others. As he mentioned, you can learn more about these principles at cialdini.com. Their master courses provide an even deeper dive for those who want to champion these strategies as instructors. Remember, as leaders in our circles of influence, we have the responsibility to guide with intention, respect, and integrity. Take the next step by reading Dr. Cialdini's classic book Influence with the book links below. I think you'll really enjoy it. I did. Also, let's get these links up for these guys. Please follow Dr. Cialdini on X at Robert Cialdini and Dr. Phelps on Instagram at dr.christopherphelps. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell for more transformative insights that will help you lead with trust, passion, and purpose. Please share this episode with someone who could benefit from these principles. Dr. Phelps, before we wrap, could you share a few key takeaways for our audience that they can start applying today? Something coming from you would really be insightful. We love that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, the way this kind of works with consistency is you kind of start with the end in mind and you reverse engineer the questions and the commitments people need to make as if they're taking steps towards you
Hmm.
for right. So the better you get, as I said earlier, at framing things as a this or that format, the more influence and acceptance you're going to have. And ideally, you want what you want them to say yes to be the second thing, that, right? You want to do nothing and have the root canal or do the crown, right? So the second thing, I
Mm-hmm.
position that there for a reason, right? I've noticed like at Starbucks, right? Instead of them just having a tip jar out there, now they're giving you a voluntary choice, this or that. Put your money. Who's going to win the big game this weekend? This team or that team? And all of a sudden, by offering that voluntary choice, more people started donating and giving tips and whatnot. So think about that when you're presenting your options. How can you present it as a this or that scenario? How can you add that public nature to it? Right. So if somebody's committed to something, the more people that know that they were committed to that, the better. So we do this in the dental world when making appointments. So after a new patient has made their appointment with us, my team member will say something to the effect of, "Great, we got you down. I'll let the doctor and the other team members know to expect you at this day and this time." Oh crap! Everybody knows I said I was going to be there then, and the doctor knows. All right, I guess I better show.
It's all making sense now.
So, how can you make it more of a public nature so that more people know what you said you were going to do? If you can do that, then you're going to more likely to get acceptance. And how can you ask commitment questions to get that verbal commitment? Will you please call us if you can't make this appointment? Yes. Yes, I will. Great. Then we're looking forward to seeing you. Right. So the better you get at tapping into one or all of these type of commitments, the more influence and persuasion you're going to have in what you do.
Absolutely makes sense. Well, this has truly been an honor. Dr. Phelps, thank you for making this a meaningful and enlightening experience. Our thanks extend to Dr. Cialdini for his groundbreaking work, to all your team at the Cialdini Institute. For our viewers, all the links to the resources and courses we've discussed are in the links below. As you reflect on today's insights, think about one small promise you can keep to build trust and momentum in your life. Remember, consistency is the foundation of meaningful influence.
Stay committed and stay consistent.
And let's go do it all.
Do it all.
Thanks, Dr. Phelps. It's been great.
Thank you.